Draft Mechanic is a proud member of Punchboard Media. Pull up a chair at punchboardmedia.com.
Draft Mechanic, Episode 102.
On this episode of Draft Mechanic, we discuss recent plays of Reef, Lotus, and Scoville. We've got a variant segment comparing Uwe Rosenberg's Puzzle Trilogy, all of which we're putting on tap. We talk about homebrew legalization, and in our final round, we asked our Slack channel what makes a great board game app. So sit back, relax, grab a pint, and enjoy the show.
You've seen the future and it works to take a mile. Know that all is for the best in the best of our
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Draft Mechanic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Danielle.
And Draft Mechanic is the board game about craft beer and podcast.
Nope.
How has it taken 100 and something episodes for me to mess that up? Hey everybody, Draft Mechanic is the podcast about board games and craft beer and anything we can do to tie the two together.
Here at Draft Mechanic, we like our beer like we like our board games.
With as few holes as possible?
I mean, do bubbles count as holes? Because
Okay,
sometimes you
okay.
want bubbles in a beer. You want a nice head on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're taking a look at Uwe Rosenberg's Puzzle Trilogy, and pretty much in all of these games, you're wanting to have as few holes as possible on your board by the end of the game, so I feel like that makes sense.
I mean, technically you want lots of holes in
Okay,
Spring Meadow. You just want them
marmots.
to be lined up with the holes on the board.
Okay, true. Well, we'll get to that in our main feature, but hey, if this is your first episode of Draft Mechanic, thank you so much for joining us today. You can find us on the internet at draftmechanic.net, and also Draft Mechanic on all your favorite social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, really just those three. We don't use any other ones.
Well, not just those three, because we also have a Board Game Geek Guild. That is guild number 2470. There will be a thread up for this episode as there is for every episode.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're saying something and you're like, I have a thought on that, that is the place to share it with everyone.
We also have a Board Game Geek micro badge, which nobody picked up since the last episode, so I'm just going to be sad about all the micro badges we don't have.
Got your 100. You don't get
We
to be
got it.
sad anymore.
Yeah. But if you would like to pick that up and you need some Geek Gold, of course, hit up the thread in the guild about that, and we will throw some Geek Gold at you.
If you happen to be in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, we have board game meetups twice a month. Our next one is coming up on June 18th at Salud Cerveceria. That is the third Tuesday of the month, as we do every third Tuesday of the month. We also have a meetup on the first Thursday of the month at Good Road Cider Works, and that will be happening in July.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, if you're going to Origins and you want to go to a really cool event, Punchboard Media is hosting a meetup on Friday, June 14th of Origins. It's going to be in the Unpub room at 9:30 p.m. It's going to be super awesome. From what I have heard over the past few years of doing this meetup, we do a massive giveaway. There's a whole bunch of swag, and of course, a whole ton of Punchboard Media creators will be there as well.
And if you'd like to talk to Jake and tell him how he's the coolest half of Draft Mechanic, you can do that because he will be the only one there and you won't hurt my feelings.
Yes, lie to my face and tell me that I'm the cool one. Yeah, I kind of just, in the very last minute, was able to swing going to Origins, just moving some schedule stuff around, and found an air mattress and a floor to sleep on. So I'm going to be going to Origins. Yeah, I'll be at that Punchboard Media meetup on Friday night and just kind of floating around aimlessly. I'll bring some Draft Mechanic pins with me. If you want to pick one of those up, you can totally do that too. They'll be $5 into my hand, and I will give you the pin, and everything will be good. So yeah, look for me, I guess. Or listen for my voice, because you don't know what I look like yet.
You're probably going to be wearing a t-shirt. I assume you'll be wearing a Draft Mechanic t-shirt on all days.
True. And if not, I'll probably have my Burial Beer Company hat with a Draft Mechanic pin on it on days that I choose to wear a fancy flowery shirt, because, I mean, I like those flowery shirts a lot. That's kind of my whole jam right now.
You're an adult. You can wear what you like.
So in show news, moving on, we actually recorded our spoiler episode for Time Stories finale, Madame, and we're going to release that at some point. True to Draft Mechanic fashion, it will magically appear at some point in your podcast feed. And if you have finished Time Stories and you want to hear our thoughts, you can listen to that. If not, and you don't want to finish Time Stories, you can also listen to that, I guess. But suffice to say, it is definitely a conclusion of this thing.
Yeah, if you've listened to our spoiler episodes before, normally we record the first group and then the second group, and you get two different complete discussions. This one, we actually recorded one big discussion at the end after the second group had gone through. Mm-hmm. So you get to hear a bunch of people's different opinions. 7 of the 8 of us were able to be there. So,
and if you listened to episode 100 and heard us talk about Time Stories at the end, you might kind of understand why we didn't record immediately after Madame.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. In games news, I have 2 interesting thoughts. No, 2 interesting news
you
items.
Don't.
I have one interesting thought, but we'll get to that later. Mystic Vale has dropped kind of out of nowhere on iOS, and the app was, I think, was $5 on the first day of release, so it was super cheap, and it came with the first expansion free. I don't know if that sale is still going on as of time of this podcast being released, but the app looks super slick. I haven't had a chance to dive into it yet, but if you really want to carry Mystic Vale around, specifically leave it in your hot car and not have the cards explode on you, this is an option for you.
Don't leave your phone in your hot car. A, your phone will probably get stolen, and B, the temperature is not great for it.
True. But it looks like it also has online play, so if you want to do that, maybe that is a thing you can do. The other one, and this is a game announcement that I am super excited about, there is an announcement for Cities Skylines board game. This is from Paradox Interactive, and it's going to be published by Cosmos. Paradox makes a bunch of computer games. We talked about them at our Gen Con episode with Europa Universalis and Crusader Kings.
They also make Cities Skylines.
Yeah, were the first two offerings that they're bringing into the tabletop space. And Cities Skylines was kind of announced, but not really any information about it. But it was just announced in the last week or two that this game is going to be coming to tabletops in October of this year. They're going to release it in the US and in Europe at the same time, which is good, I guess, for us statesides, because that means I'm going to be able to, play it sooner rather than later. Cities Skylines, the board game, is going to be designed by, or it was designed by, one of the designers of Nations, and this is a cooperative scenario-based city management game. So if you've played Cities Skylines on the computer, it's about building cities and infrastructure and kind of like super duper Sim City.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you haven't, it is Sim City, but with curves.
But one of the things that I was reading about it online is that the designer has really focused on changing this, multiple 100-hour game into something that you can play in, 2-ish hours as a cooperative experience, and kind of based on the scenarios of city management rather than the starting from nothing and building up to a megalopolis kind of city building that you get in the video game. I'm super excited about this. I've always kind of liked city management games. I used to play a lot of SimCity back in the day. We watched a lot of Cities Skylines. I didn't play Cities Skylines.
I did.
You did? Yeah, you played a lot of it. And I just, love the concept of these games. And I'm excited to see how they translate to tabletop. As somebody who played Cities Skylines, are you excited about this thing?
As someone who is generally skeptical about things in general, I am generally skeptical about this game. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of the fun of those types of games is building your city the way you want to do it. And if they're moving from the building focus to a management focus, I think that's kind of the less interesting part. Also, the idea of taking a game that you're supposed to put 100 to 200 hours into and distilling it down to 2 hours feels like it's going to take a lot of what was special about that game and maybe remove it.
Okay.
But, I'll give it a shot. I'm not going to be like, no, that's terrible, I hate it. I'm just going to say it probably won't feel like playing the video game.
True.
Because that doesn't seem like it's possible.
Well, if you are interested in this thing, you can pre-order it now from your favorite online retailers and other retailers. The game has an MSRP.
You can pre-order it from places you don't like.
Well, other than online retailers. Your friendly local game store can probably pre-order this as well. It has an MSRP of $50, which I'm really surprised about. I expected this to be a much bigger box game, but it looks like they really focused just on, a bunch of cardboard, tons and tons of cardboards, a lot of polyomino-shaped pieces. Ha ha ha. Tie that into the episode. So you can get it for $35 on your favorite online retailers. And not saying that anybody in this room has already pre-ordered it, but I did. I guess I am explicitly saying that.
That doesn't increase my confidence that this is going to feel like the cool video game that Cities Skylines was. When you're saying it's only $50 and it's mostly cardboard. That doesn't... I understand why that would work very well for a grid-based city building game, but at the same time being it's a small game, that doesn't make me feel like they've captured the essence.
Well, I am going to keep my eye on it, and if it looks like it's going to be terrible, you can always cancel a pre-order. But yeah, if that sounds interesting to you, Cities Skylines is available for pre-order. I'm kind of surprised about that.
Cool.
Speaking of games in the future, Danielle, would you like to tell us about some updates of Kickstarter games?
Sure. First up, Cleopatra and the Society of Architects from Mojito Studios finished their campaign at $351,835 of their $45,000 goal, having 3,679 backers. They earned 17 stretch goals, so there's going to be a lot in this box, as if that wasn't already a given, because this game is all about the little flashy pieces that come with it.
The deluxe edition components look ridiculous. And the box that it comes in is just this massive cube of a box that is going to take up pretty much... It looks like it'll take up an entire space on your Calyx board gaming shelf. That's a lot.
Yeah, this is a first Kickstarter for Mojito Studios, if I remember correctly, so I am going to reserve judgment on how that's going to go. Cristallo from Lightheart Games finished their campaign at $42,479 of their $4,200 goal. They had 2,066 backers, and they unlocked all the component upgrades, and late pledges are available on their Kickstarter page if you would like to grab this one.
Mm-hmm.
Matryoshka from Lademan Games is finished at $6,234 of their $3,200 goal with 291 backers. 290 of them aren't Jake. Pre-orders are available on their Kickstarter page as well, and they unlocked some nice magnetic clasping box as one of the upgrades that they got,
Yay.
which is cool. Not that I think ours will ever live in the box, because I have a feeling it's going to replace the old version of Matryoshka in our quiver.
Maybe.
Clinic Deluxe Edition from AV Studios finished their campaign with $243,751 of their $30,000 goal, 2,518 backers. They unlocked 7 stretch goals, including a fire extinguisher and an ambulance. And those are going to be little meeples, which is cute.
Cute. So for new projects, I actually am a little light on them this episode because with Origins coming up, a lot of people are kind of maneuvering their Kickstarters around that. Like I know talking with Jason Kotarski over at Green Couch Games, he was holding off on Darwinauts to launch after Origins specifically because he doesn't want to have that kind of interfere with the show. That first week is so critical. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about on the next episode. But for this particular episode, I just have 2 items for you. First up is a game called Fickle, coming from Bard Games, currently funding at $34,000 of its $8,000 goal with 592 backers. This one ends on Wednesday, June 19th, with an estimated delivery of September 2019. You can back the game $39 for the base or $60 for the base, plus some add-ons as they get unlocked. The add-ons are a PDF coloring book, a fairy crown kind of miniature, and a fancy bag. So Fickle is a light set collection game with 19 interchangeable sets of fairy families for variability. You're picking 5 of those families per game, and they all have interesting card effects like the way that they interact. Some of them are super high player interaction, some of them are tableau building, so on and so forth. Kind of think like how you do all the different card sets in Ethnos, and you choose which ones you want for that particular game, but fairies. Mm-hmm. So the whole concept of the game is that you are trying to get just one of each of those fairy families into your tableau, and then you are scoring for having a variety of them, and you are penalized if you take too many of the same kind. Of course, depending on the powers that you're using, it's going to manipulate the cards in weird and interesting ways, or maybe specifically aim at you can just get a whole bunch of one family, or you're just able to kind of manipulate the card order so you take specifically what you want. And the art on this is by Amy Brown, who is a pretty well-known artist of fairies, your classic fairy art. And if you go on the Kickstarter's website, you can obviously go to Amy Brown's page, and she's been doing fairy art for like 20 or 30 years. So her art is all over the place. A lot of tattoo artists have used that as inspiration. A lot of fantasy artists use that stuff as inspiration. You can see her art pretty much everywhere. If you think of like the most known style of fairy artwork, you're probably thinking about Amy Brown stuff. The art is really, really good if you like this style of art, so I would encourage you to check it out. And the gameplay itself looks really interesting as well. I love having that many variable sets that you can plug in and out to really change the way the game plays. And it looks like the game plays in 20 to 30 minutes, so it's a quick and easy to teach and easy to play thing that's good for a game night. If you're interested, What's Eric Playing has a Kickstarter preview up for this, and of course, in Eric's true fashion, there are tons and tons of pictures of it, and he really breaks down the gameplay, what he likes, what he doesn't like. I always like to refer to Eric's stuff when we have a Kickstarter here. He does a lot of Kickstarter previews and does like a really deep look at them and takes freaking awesome pictures, as you probably know.
I'd like to point out in the show notes, it just says that Amy Brown is a famous fairy artist, and I was like, is that an artist of fairies or an artist who is a fairy?
I mean, you can be both, technically.
I don't think you can be one of those things.
I don't know. Maybe they're out there. But anyway, this is, like, if this is up your alley, I definitely think that this game is worth checking out. So yeah, Fickle, it is on Kickstarter for another week or so. The second item I have is an RPG supplement book called Remarkable Shops and Their Wares. This is coming from Lore Smith, and it is currently funding at $33,000 of the $17,000 goal with 882 backers. This one ends on Thursday, July 4th, with an estimated delivery of December this year for the PDF and March next year for the physical copies. You can get the softcover copy of the book for $23 or the hardcover copy of the book for $34. And this is kind of a system-neutral RPG supplement book that is an inspiration for building your fantasy world shops and then stocking them with fantastic items and also building NPC shopkeepers to give your RPG NPC stuff a lot more personality. Lore Smith previously did a book called Remarkable Inns and Their Drinks, and you can actually get both of these books in a bundle from their Kickstarter as well. I think this is a really cool concept, and I kind of of just found it as I was scrolling up and down the Kickstarter page, which is kind of where I find the most interesting stuff. I don't know. Does this seem like an interesting and useful thing to you? Not specifically you, but, as to RPG players in general?
Yeah, this seems like it's going to add a lot of depth to any kind of homegrown world. Like, a lot of RPG supplements have this stuff built in already. But if you are not working off of a book, if you have a campaign that your DM is making up either as they go or has made up before you start, this is going to add a lot of details that they can refer to add interesting things that they might not have already pre-planned if they're making something up. Mm-hmm. This reminds me a lot of the Maps RPG supplement that we talked about a couple of months ago that had all those beautiful full-colored maps. This seems like an NPC version of that type of supplement, and it's the kind of thing that if you are frequently running campaigns, or maybe you're running a campaign for the first time and you're not really comfortable fleshing out the entire world, this kind of thing could be really helpful for you.
They actually have unlocked one stretch goal, which is going to include some floor plans of shops as well, which is an interesting thing that I never really thought about, but makes a lot of sense. We're running through our D&D campaign, and I've got my mental map of what Jominda's shop looked like, but you probably have a completely different one, and I'm sure everybody else has a different idea of what that really looks like. So to have kind of a floor plan as a, DM to kind of come up with an idea of what it would look like, or really just think about this is how shops could actually look. You want to consider these things as you're building these places. That's a really cool additional supplement, and I just really like the idea of this book. I could see myself grabbing some copies of the soft covers of this. I'm not doing any DMing right now, but it's something that I do want to do at some point in the future. I've got the Overlight core books downstairs, and I really want to play in that world. So having this as another supplement, like you said, as somebody who wants to DM but hasn't done it before, might be a really, really cool thing to grab onto.
So check that out.
Yeah, that is Remarkable Shops and Their Wares. All right, well, time to move on to some recent plays. Let's do that thing.
Want to wear your draft mechanic pride to your local brewery, board game meetup, or board game meetup at a brewery? Check out redbubble.com/people/draftmechanic for t-shirts. So first we got a chance to play Reef, which is a 2018 release from Next Move Games, which plays 2 to 4 players in 30 to 45 minutes. It's designed by Emerson Matsuuchi, and the artist is Chris Quilliams. This is a game of abstract strategy, with pattern placement and stacking Duplo coral.
I think that is the best comparison for what the pieces in this game look like.
For sure.
Yeah, so Reef from Next Move Games, like you said, abstract game where you are basically stacking a bunch of these super chunky plastic reef pieces in 4 different colors on your personal player board. You have a board that is a 4x4 grid. You're going to start out with one of each color in the center, and all of the game's actions take place through playing cards. On your turn, you're either going to take one of the cards that is available from a center trade row, or you're going to play a card out of your hand. The cards, when you play them, have 2 different pieces of information on them. First, the top half of the card tells you which 2 colors of coral you're going to take out of the center pile supply and place onto your board. You can stack them pretty much anywhere. You're trying to obviously form some patterns, because the bottom half of the card will give you a scoring opportunity. They will ask for you to have corals of certain heights with a certain top color, or maybe colors next to each other, so on and so forth. There's a bunch of different scoring conditions, and we don't have to go into specifics in this part of it, but that's pretty much the whole game. The only other kind of catch about it is that if you want to take the top card off of the draw deck, which is always visible, you have to put one of your point tokens back onto the lowest value scoring card on the trade row of 3 cards. The game's going to go until you either run out of one of the colors of coral, or until the deck runs out of cards, and then you count up your tokens, and if you have the most tokens, you have done the best reefing.
Let's not lie, you're probably going to run out of one of the colors of coral well before you run out of cards.
Yeah, absolutely true. And this really, the explanation of the game is about as long as this game is going to take. It's really quick. That 30 minutes is not a lie. I think we played 4 players in like 27 minutes when we played this most recently. But it's super quick and super snappy, and it really kind of just fills the whole thought of what Next Move Games and I guess Plan B does. It's kind of comparable in a way to Century Spice Road in that way.
Explain how.
In that you're, taking a card, and your option is either to take a card or play a card, and those cards are going to manipulate your pieces in some way.
I suppose. I mean, Century Spice Road feels a lot slower than Reef, though, to me.
Yeah, true. It gives me that same kind of snappiness that a Splendor or something of that light, either play a card or take a card kind of engine building thing will do. This one doesn't really have the engine building, though, I guess.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have the engine building, and it doesn't really have any of the working towards the goal. You're like, the most you're going to be doing to work towards a goal is if you've got a card in your hand, you might take maybe 1 or 2 cards to be able to get more of that color of coral, to be able to score that more iterations of that particular scoring, because you can score multiple iterations of each of the different scoring conditions on a card when you play it. but you're never going to be looking more than 1 or 2 cards ahead in this game. And if there were such a thing as an engine that you were building, it goes away once you play the cards.
Yeah.
So this is really just, it is almost mindless how quick that you are playing through this game. I don't mean that as necessarily a dig. It sounds a lot meaner than it is. But it is a very basic style of game. You're not going to be having a deep strategy or intense decisions in this game at all.
I would really say this is the lightest thing that I've played from Emerson Matsuuchi. You know, obviously has done a lot of Plan B / next move stuff in the past, but this really is just that draw a card or play a card, and then maybe you score something off of it. And we've had this for a while, and just kind of, it comes out every few months, and just because it's so pretty. And I think that's really where the space is. This is such an ultimate gateway game in a way, because it's so pretty, it's so colorful, it's so easy to teach, and it's really quick and easy to play. Like, I feel like anybody in the world could play this game that is able to see the colors, and they're all different shapes too, which is nice. But beyond that, I don't see a lot of space for this game.
Yeah. If you have somebody who is capable of playing something like Azul, which is not a heavier game, it's another Plan B game, or sorry, Next Move. Is Azul Plan B or Next Move now?
It's now Next Move.
Okay.
After the 3rd or 4th printing, they've moved it over the Next Move line.
Okay, so if you have somebody who's willing to play a game like Azul, Reef is going to be more simple than that. And I'd much rather play Azul than to play Reef again. Like, Reef is fine. It is not a bad game, but it is the kind of thing that I would play if I had small kids that I was trying to play a game with. Whereas if you're playing a game, even with non-gamer adults, I think something like Azul is very, very reasonable, especially on the pre-printed side.
Okay.
And I'm never going to choose to play Reef over Azul, again, unless I'm playing a game with very small children.
Yeah.
Like pre-kindergarten children.
Yeah, and I think that is the place for Reef. If you have a super wide range of people you're playing with, from the youngest to the oldest, Reef can definitely fill 30 minutes of your time. Frankly, I'm probably ready to move on from this one, because I'd rather even play Century, and I've never been a huge fan of Century.
Well, I don't think you can do that anymore. I think we got rid of our copy.
No, but I feel like there's enough copies of Century in the world that we could easily find a copy of that. But Reef, again, it's super pretty, and I like having it at game night, specifically our game night meetups, because it is something that people might grab, just be like, oh, this is super colorful. I've never played board games before, and I can be like, okay, cool, this is going to be a super easy way to get some new gamers into games. And it is kind of rewarding, because you get to play with Duplos. I mean, not actually Duplos. Duplo Coral. Not trademarked that way. All right, well, that is Reef. Moving on, we have Lotus, or rather Danielle has Lotus, because I've not had a chance to play this 2016 release from Renegade Game Studios. It plays 2 to 4 players in 30 minutes, designed by Jordan and Mandy Goddard, with art by Anita Osborne and Chris Ostrowski. This is a game of hand management and set collection. It's a card game with them flowers.
Yeah, and I had gotten a chance to play this back, I want to say probably in 2016 or very early 2017 when it had come out. And I played it, and I never really got a chance to play it again. We don't own a copy of it. And we were at game night the other night, and one of the folks who was there had it and brought it out. And I was like, okay, let me give it another shot. My tastes have changed enough since 2016 that maybe I'll really enjoy this game. What it is each player is going to have their own deck of flower petal cards. And you are going to be taking turns, taking cards from your hand and playing them out onto flowers in the center of the table. So you are cooperatively working on these flowers. There are different types of flowers. There is one that has 3 petals, one that has 4 petals, all the way up to 7 petals being the largest flower that you can make. Ooh. And on your turn, at the beginning of the game, you are going to be able to play up to 2 petal cards as an action, or you can take some cards and you can bury them under your deck to draw them again later and draw back up as an action. Or you can place one of your guardian tokens, which are these little meeples that you have that are going to add to your presence on a flower. On your turn, you're going to get to do 2 of those things. You can do one of them twice if you'd like. And the object is to place out your cards, which each have a number of your presence icons on them. Most of them are 1, some of them are 2, if you have a particularly strong card in your hand. And you form these flowers. There can only ever be 1 flower at a time of each type. So if there is a 4 and you have a 4 petal, you have to play it onto the flower that is already there. And when you finish the complete number of petals for each flower, you're going to count up the number of presence markers that each person has, whether they're printed on the cards or they're those guardians that I had talked about earlier. Whoever has completed the flower will get the cards, and cards are points at the end of the game. However, whoever has the strongest presence on that flower will either get to upgrade one of their abilities. You have 3 upgrades that you can take throughout the game. One increases your hand size, one gives you a guardian that is worth 2 presents that you can place out onto flowers, and one allows you to play more than 2 cards of the same type of flower as one action. Or you get 5 points, which is also points at the end of the game. The points are points.
Points is how you win, right?
Points are how you win.
Okay, just making sure.
So you're going to keep going until one person runs out of all of the cards in their deck, at which point everybody's going to get the end of their at which point everybody's going to get one more turn, and you're going to count up the number of cards and point tokens that everybody has from flowers that they've either finished or had the strongest presence on, and whoever has the most points wins.
Oh, the most points.
The most points.
I guess we did just go over that.
Because this game is working off a shared flower pool, I want to say, in the center, there is a certain degree of player interaction. When you draw up at the end of your turn, you can either draw off of your personal deck, or there is like a general set of petals that anybody can draw from. So if you see that somebody is drawing for a particular flower, you can plan not to help them with that flower, or make a flower of that type where if they finish that particular flower, they're going to get you points because you've already established a presence they can't beat. There is a certain degree to which you can figure out how strong somebody else's presence can be, because you know how many guardians they have and what each is worth, and you know the maximum number of petals that can exist on a flower. So if they can only maybe add 1 more petal to a flower, and they only have their initial 2 guardians available to them, you know that at very most they're going to have 4 presents. So you can set it up so that you have more than that, which means that you're going to get points, or they're going to have to wait to play onto that flower, which maybe that's what they have in their hand and they're going to want to do it. But despite that little bit of player interaction, I really never felt like I was affecting really very strongly the other players. We played a 3-player game, and while I would finish a flower and be like, oh, I can't get both sets of points for that, still finishing a flower gives you the cards for that flower. And if it's a larger flower, you might be getting more points than the other player is, because in a 6 or a 7, you're getting more cards than the other person is getting points for having control. And while it felt good to get points for either finishing a flower or for having the majority on it and getting somebody else to give you points, I never really felt like I had done something super clever at any point in the game. I had just done what was obvious based on my hand, or if my hand didn't give me anything obvious, I buried some cards until I got something that was obvious and reasonable for me to do on a following turn. I came out of Lotus wanting to feel like, oh, this game actually had more than I had initially sensed on my first play, but I really just ended up feeling the same way, which is that this is a fine card game, but not something I need to own and not something that I'm going to ask to be playing.
Okay.
I'll certainly play it again with other players, assuming that none of them are really, really aggressively competitive, because that just doesn't seem like it would be an enjoyable table environment. I don't think it would affect the game too terribly, because there is only a limited amount of ways that you can block somebody in this game, but I just don't think that would be fun with somebody who is aggressively competitive as a player. But yeah, I'm not going to be asking for this one. It's fine, but it's just fine.
Okay. I know an app version of this one was released a few years ago, might have been last year. And do you feel that, like, would you spend $5 to play this game on your phone against AI? Do you feel like that's a good level if somebody was interested in this game?
No.
Oh, okay.
I would rather play this on the table than on an app.
Okay.
Because it is about working with or against other players, because player interaction is sort of the core of this game, I would want to play it with actually another person. $5 isn't particularly cheap for a card game app.
Yeah.
And this game, if you wanted to buy it, is $30 MSRP, or $24 I think it's available for on Amazon right now. If you wanted it badly enough that you actually wanted to own this game to play it multiple times, I think you're probably better off just buying the physical copy. I will say that the art is absolutely beautiful. The box art is gorgeous, although it has very little to do with the rest of the game. And the flower art is very nice flower art. I mean, obviously, if you're going to make a game about placing flower petals, you're going to want them to look very pretty, because that's sort of the point. It's nice to have the little different shaped meeples for your guardians. Each player's guardian meeple is a different bug. So one player is the dragonflies and one player is the caterpillars. There's ladybugs and butterflies, I think is the fourth one. So you can very easily tell whose is whose, especially since those advanced guardians are all silver for everybody. So the shape is how you tell the difference. I think there is enough benefit if you really want this to getting the physical copy that I probably wouldn't get the app.
Okay.
But I probably wouldn't get the physical copy either.
Gotcha. That's an interesting distinction we're going to probably be making a lot more in the coming years, and we'll talk about this again in the final round about is this worth it as an app or a physical or both or neither. So yeah, interesting thought there.
Speaking of things which have fun little shaped meeples, next we're going to be talking about your recent play of Scoville, which is a 2014 release from Tasty Minstrel Games. This plays 2 to 6 players in 60 to 90 minutes. It is designed by Ed Marriott, and the art is by Josh Capel. This is a game of pepper farming, chili making, and all-around colorful, spicy fun. And we have definitely talked about this before. In episode 14, we did a review of it. In 20, we did a designer interview for the Labs expansion with Ed Marriott, and we did an on tap then. And we talked about it in episode 45 and 62. It came up in 6-pack lists.
Yeah, so here we are, episode 102, 40 episodes later since we've talked about this game. I don't know, I've kind of been wanting to get back to some of those early games, and I feel like this is one of those, we're over 100 episodes and we got to look back on stuff now kind of feelings to me. But somebody in our game group who comes to our game nights regularly really has been wanting to play Scoville for a little while, and this is a game that I remember enjoying a lot, so we had a chance to get it to the table at our last game night at Good Road.
Okay, and did you still enjoy it?
Yes. So I'll tell quickly about Scoville. So this game plays, like you said, 2 to 6 players, and you are basically pepper farming. You have a giant grid board in front of you where you're going to be placing these awesome little pepper meeples into the different spots in the area. You're going to be walking your farmer around between the peppers and harvesting kind of the crossbreeding of those peppers. So you have like primary level and secondary level and the tertiary level peppers that get more and more powerful and give you more and more points for using them in the chili recipes and also at the farmer's markets, and then also for planting them back into the field. One of the things that I think is super interesting about this game is the way that your turn order takes place. At the beginning of each round, you're going to blind bid for turn order, a certain amount of money, which is one of the resources in the game, and you're going to choose where in turn order you want to go. Not just the most gets to go first, but you choose where you get to go, because you're going to have 3 sections of each round of the game. The first one, you're going to be taking these special auction cards from the top of the deck, or from the top of the board that give you some peppers, and also planting out into the field, and that's going to go in turn order. And then in reverse turn order, you're going to be moving your farmer around the board, doing that crossbreeding and getting peppers into your personal supply.
And blocking other players, if I remember correctly.
Oh, very much so. And then the third phase goes back to regular turn order, where you're fulfilling the chili recipes, because chili cook-off in the town of Scoville, obviously, and also getting the farmer's market cards, which allow you to trade in some peppers for either peppers or money or points or all of the above. And then obviously at the beginning of the next round, you'll auction again, or you'll do a blind bidding again to change the turn order again. And I think that turn order, the bidding for the turn order, is what makes this game so special to me, because it really does adapt really well to a high player count game. And like we talked about, and I think 62 is when we were doing the 6-player games episode, and we brought this up.
Sure.
Having that turn order mechanic being such an integral part of it kind of eliminates the downtime, quote unquote, of a high player count game, because you're so interested in what the other players are doing, and you're choosing when you get to go in turn order, so that if I want to pick either first or last, I know that I can, think about my strategy for a part of the Serpentine draft until it gets back around to me. And frankly, playing this, we played with 5 players again this last week, makes me want to play this game at 4 to 6 players more than I would ever want to play it with a low player count. And I'm actually kind of bummed that it's been so long since I played Scoville, because here I am years later coming back to this game we talked about literally 92 episodes ago.
Math.
Literally a bunch of episodes ago. Math is hard all the time. A whole bunch of episodes ago, and I really still just want to play this game. And it's awesome to come back to an old game like that doesn't get talked about a lot anymore, and say, yo, Scoville's really good, and maybe this one should be hidden up on more of my top 10 lists in the future.
Okay, this is a 5-year-old game. It's not that old a game.
No, but in terms of the podcast, it is.
Okay. Did you guys play with the labs or no?
We did. And this is another thing I got to say. Labs is what I call a quote-unquote perfect expansion in that it adds a little bit more, but doesn't change anything significantly. You have your own little personal 3x3 board off to the side where you can optionally plant an additional pepper in there. And as you build up more peppers in there, you get to kind of produce like a one-time pepper back to yourself. So it's a nice little way to get some special stuff back to yourself. It also adds in some more cards for chili recipes and the farmer's market that give you some more options to play with.
That feels like it would be better for a high player count as well, because blocking is so important in the way you're moving your farmers around that field. Even though you're planting more peppers, with a higher player count game, there is certainly more chance that you're going to get blocked off from getting the exact combination that you want. So having that labs expansion where you can guarantee that you're going to be able to get some of the peppers that you want for what you're planning to do feels like it is going to make a 6-player game work a lot better than it is going to benefit like a 2-player game or something like that.
And it's always interesting to me how quickly this game scales up. The first 1 or 2 rounds, you're really just working with primary peppers, your red, your blue, and your yellow, and just trying so hard to get to orange pepper. I really want to get a brown pepper because then I can be the first to plant that and get some points off of that. But it really is interesting how rounds 3 and 4, you're just like, all of a sudden everybody's got white and black peppers, which are the, second to highest level from the phantom pepper, which is, you'll get a few of those in maybe the final round of the game.
Phantom
Pepper. It's actually kind of funny. Everybody obviously calls them ghost pepper, but ghost pepper is apparently trademarked, so they had to call them phantom peppers. Yeah, that's why they're called phantom peppers in Scoville, is apparently some kind of trademark thing.
Okay.
But Scoville's a lot of fun, and I'm super glad I got a chance to play it again, and I really just kind of want to leave this in the game night bag for a while, because with experienced players, you can get this one down to an hour for a 5-player game, and even if it is in that 90-minute range, you're still having a fun time the whole time through.
Well, I'm glad you're going to keep it in the bag, because I didn't get to play that game, so I would like to play it again, too.
Yeah, and, you made a joke about how, this game's only 5 years old, but in especially our perspective, having to review, talk about 3 to 5 new games every episode, it is kind of weird to look back at some of these games that are just 5 years old, but it's been forever, quote unquote, since we've had a chance to play them. So I'm hoping over the next, some odd episodes, maybe we have some more of these pop back up into our play circle again and put them in the recent plays. I don't want to do anything formal about it, but maybe this is just we're old podcasters talking. So if you have something from the early episodes that you want to play again, I would definitely suggest that you throw it into the game night bag and trick us into playing it.
One other thing I do want to mention before we move away from Scoville is that the components in this game are absolutely great. We didn't mention it earlier in this particular discussion, but I'm sure we've mentioned it before. The board for this is a puzzle piece board, so you don't have to worry about the board not laying flat or things not sitting nicely on the board. It always fits together very nicely in the puzzle piece, and it's got little punch outs for the peppers to sit into. The peppers are all different heights depending on what level of pepper they are, so your primary color peppers are shorter than your secondary color peppers, are shorter than your tertiary color peppers, and they obviously all are different colors, but not everybody can see those colors, so it's nice to have different heights of them. The labs have the same cutouts that the peppers fit into. You've got a nice little shield to keep all of your stuff behind, so you don't have to worry about hiding it. It is a very well done game, and I enjoy that about it as well.
Scoville, it's great. You should go play Scoville. I would wholeheartedly get behind that.
Finish an episode here?
Well, I mean, you, the listener. You the listener, play Scoville and let us know how you enjoy it. All right. That's it for recent plays. Keeping it kind of quick this episode because we have a final round we want to get to. That is coming.
He says 40 minutes into the episode.
But it is time for us to move on to our main feature. Yes, it's time for variants. Once again, let's talk about a lot of polyominoes. When the zombie horde comes for you, you need to be quick about killing them off, pushing them back, and getting the heck out of Dodge.
And that's exactly what you're doing in Run Fighter Die Reloaded from Grey Fox Games. Players each roll their dice to be able to thin the ever-encroaching plague of the undead, gain followers and loot, and explore new locations to make it out to the town line alive without too many infected in their own group.
Grey Fox has upgraded their popular title, Run Fight or Die, to reduce fiddliness, streamline dice and character combos, add follower health, and modernize the art and miniatures.
Whether you're a fan of the original or this standalone title is your first trip to the Run Fight or Die universe, check out Run Fight or Die Reloaded from Grey Fox Games.
Grey Fox Games, quality games, cleverly crafted. In a world of too many right-angled pieces,
Dun dun!
one man made a whole bunch of games featuring polyominoes.
Boom!
So anyway, today on this particular episode of Draft Mechanic, we are doing a variance segment, which has 3 games in it, which is actually a first for us. We've always done, like, compare and contrast 2 games, but when you're looking at these games in particular, it kind of makes sense to do all 3.
Well, usually we're a little bit more strict about comparing very, very similar games, or games that are essentially using the same base system. And I guess these are all using the same base system.
Yeah.
We just usually don't have 3 games that are using the same base system.
And it makes sense because these are specifically designed as a trilogy. We are talking about Uwe Rosenberg's Puzzle Trilogy, as he refers to them, or the polyomino-based, as I will call them for the remainder of this episode, because I love a good portmanteau.
That you do.
So all 3 of these games, Cottage Garden, Indian Summer, and Spring Meadow, were designed by Uwe Rosenberg. They were published by Stronghold in the US and Spielweise in Europe, and they have art by Andrea Bokoff. Believe it or not, all 3 of these games also play 1 to 4 players in about 15 minutes per player.
I believe that.
Yes, Cottage Garden features pots, cats, and flowers. Indian Summer features leaves, squirrels, and tokens. And Spring Meadow features meadows, marmots, and rocks.
Do you want to give me the years on those too?
Yes, Cottage Garden, the first in the series, was released in 2016. Indian Summer was released in 2017. And believe it or not, Spring Meadow was released in 2018.
How regular?
Interesting. So, obviously, Uwe has fallen into, not a rut, but he's found a specific niche he wanted to play around in. We saw it with Patchwork, with, obviously, that being a game all about polyominoes. Feast for Odin had a chunk of that as well, obviously, because you're moving all your little pieces around in your Viking storage zone. Second Chance, the game that we talked about last episode that does exist and is featuring polyominoes,
Sure is.
also as a game. And we obviously have these 3, which kind of continue to play on that motif as well. So we are going to talk about all 3 of them, and then compare, contrast, and conglomerate them into our particular variance review.
I have
Danielle?
a feeling our discussion is also going to involve a lot of discussion of Patchwork, because Patchwork does sort of tie into these games a lot more than the other 2 that you mentioned, Feast for Odin or Second Chance.
Yes.
Patchwork sort of fits in with this. It's not part of the series, but it definitely could be part of the series if it wanted to be.
And it is fantastic.
It is also very good, yes.
Danielle, will you explain to us Cottage Garden?
In Cottage Garden, you are trying to fill up the empty spaces in each of the flower beds that you have in front of you. Each player is going to have 2 flower beds at a time in front of them, and they will have some pre-printed scoring locations on them, which are either going to be flower pots or cloches, which are plant covers. And you are trying to do this by taking flower tiles from a central board, which is a 4x4 grid itself, and they are polyomino-shaped flower tiles, and you will be placing them onto your flower bed boards. The object here is to cover all of the spaces which are empty on each of your flower beds, while leaving as many of the flower pots and cloches available to score as you possibly can by the time all the other spaces are covered on each one. Once you have completed one of your flower beds, you can be working on both of them at the same time, you will then count how many flower pots you have, and you will move up on the flower pot scoring track, possibly getting some additional bonus tiles to place based on whether or not you cross a threshold, which is in the middle of the scoring track. And then you'll count how many cloches you have, and you'll score on that track, which is scored in a slightly different way because there are fewer of them on each of the boards pre-planted, and you can't place them out as readily as you can flower pots. And then once you've scored all that, you'll take the tiles which were on your board, you'll add them back to the end of the track with which the central board is refilled, and you'll take a new board by either flipping over one of the ones that's in front of you or taking from the supply, which is set out by the supply of tokens to fill the central board. Now, the way that you are going to be drafting the flower tiles to fill your board is that you are going to be moving a gardener token around the 4x4 grid, and you can take any of the flower tiles which is in the line immediately in front of the gardener token on your turn, which means that the available options that you're going to have in front of you are going to change based on where that gardener token is and what flowers have been taken by previous players. If you decide that you don't want to take any of the flower tiles which are in the row that is available to you, you can always take a single flower pot token and add it to one of your boards. That will not only fill in one of the empty spaces, but it will increase the scoring that you'll have at the end of the game. You can cover up some of the printed flower pots or cloches when you're placing tiles, which may allow you to place more tiles, but they will detract from your scoring, so it's nice to be able to add back in some of those flower pot tiles. There's also a cat token that you can use if you have earned it. It
Kitties.
kitties. It fills in a single space as well, and it allows you to place either a flower pot token or a flower token from the gardener row in addition to filling itself in, but they are much harder to get. The flower pot tokens are just available as your turn. You are going to keep going for the prescribed number of rounds. Once you get to, I believe it is the 5th round in most player accounts. With a 2-player, you're going to have one fewer round. But once you get to the penultimate round, anybody who has a planting bed that does not have 3 flower tokens on it already will have that board removed, and then you will continue for the final round, with the caveat that before taking any turns during that final round, you will have to give up 2 points from your position on the scoring tracks in order to take your turn. So the longer you go into that final round, the more points you're giving up. That's how you play Cottage Garden. Whoever has the most points at the end of the game is going to be the winner.
I like the fact that in your review or description there, you said that you have to earn the cats in Cottage Garden, because that's how I feel you should deal with cats in your life. You should have to earn the ability to have a cat and or pet a cat at any time. We have earned Bonus, the live studio cat. He is napping behind you right now.
I mean, his foot is on my shoulder, so I have earned him
He's
currently.
so cute, little Bonus. I'm starting with a joke here, honestly, because Cottage Garden is one I've played the least. I didn't find it super engaging when I played it, especially coming hot off of Patchwork, which I adore. And a lot of my play of Cottage Garden was on the app, which I'm sure we'll come back into discussion later on in this episode. But given the choice between playing Cottage Garden and playing Patchwork, I'm always playing Patchwork. I just love the game a lot better. Cottage Garden, I did like the fact that you're choosing out of, a row or column of where you're moving around that particular board. I really like that selection mechanic for the polyominoes.
Put a pin in that. We'll come back to it.
Oh, yeah, because it lets you plan ahead a little bit for what you're, thinking about in future turns.
Okay, yeah, but there is sort of a problem with that, which is that the board is fed from this ordered line of polyominoes that is placed at the side of the board. Mm-hmm. So you do kind of know what is filling in the board, except it's really difficult to plan because you never know which tokens are going to be taken by the time it gets to refill. So
True.
I never found myself really engaged by planning as what was coming as I was with Patchwork. In Patchwork, you need to look at what is going to come up if you move that token to a specific position, what you're offering to the other player, what that means that you might get based on what their resources are and what they can and can't buy, where they can and can't move that token on their turn. With Cottage Garden, I found myself looking at the 4x4 grid that I could choose from, but I was always choosing the thing that was best for me. I was never trying to block the other player.
Okay.
And I wasn't really super focused on the order in which things were going to come out in the future, which is weird because they make a big deal about the fact that once you finish a board, you are in charge of the order in which things are removed from your board, so that you control the order in which they go back into that cycle. Mm-hmm. But, that was never an aspect in the way I was playing this game. Maybe if I played it enough to have an ironclad Cottage Garden strategy, I might do that. But there's enough tokens in this game and there's enough permutations of how you can put them. There's not really any kind of blocking that any board can do other than just the outline of the board. You can always cover something on your board that is meant for scoring. You don't want to, because you could complete an entire garden and get no points if you cover all the scoring cloches and flower pots on this. But I never really felt like taking things off the board in a specific order was really super useful.
Just one more thing to have to manage, more buttons to click, or pieces to move.
The other thing I wasn't crazy about with Cottage Garden was the fact that you were working on 2 smaller boards. Yes, that gave you more options, because if I couldn't find a piece that worked with the one board that I was working on, I could see if there was a piece that worked with the pattern I had made on the other board, but they were significantly more restricted boards. Whereas, we're going to talk about in Indian Summer and Spring Meadow, you have one board which is larger, which is a lot more like Patchwork, where you are working on one large board as opposed to multiple small boards, which just felt kind of closed in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so with those primary thoughts out of the way, should we move on to Indian Summer?
Sure.
So, like Danielle just mentioned, in Indian Summer, you're going to be working off of your one larger player board. You have one board that is split into 6 sections, and each of those sections is a 4x3 grid of squares that you're going to fit your polyomino pieces into. The polyomino pieces are going to come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, just like usual. You have everything from 3 blocks up to, I think, some 5 or 6 block size pieces and all the oddity shapes.
5 is the red.
Oh, yeah, okay. 5 is the red, because the 3 space ones are green, and then the yellow for 4, and then the red for 5. This is going to be important because of the way you interact with other players, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. So the selection of pieces in Indian Summer takes a lot from patchwork. You have one very long line of pieces. That's going to be all of the pieces in the game, kind of in a line or a circle. It's a line, obviously, in the app because they have infinite space in the app, but you'll do it on a circle on the table, and you are going to be taking pieces into your personal set of 5 tiles that you have available as you empty out your personal set, and also as you play some of the berry tokens to refill it. This game is also kind of based around a lot of tokens. You have the berries that allow you to refill your personal knapsack of tokens. You have the nuts that allow you to call a squirrel to fill in a space, because squirrels are rectangle or blocks that you just plug into your zone, I guess.
I enjoy the idea that the nuts allow you to call a squirrel, like some kind of weird prepaid phone card of squirrels.
I mean, that's how I get all my squirrels. I just throw a nut into the field, and then I have a squirrel. And then they fit in like a square into the place.
And you shove them into a pile of leaves.
You have the mushroom, which allows you to steal 2 polyominoes from the front of the lines of other players in the game, which is super useful. And then you have the feather, which allows you to play 2 tiles of your choice from your personal track. Obviously, this is all in service of you filling up your personal player board. The game will end once somebody has filled in all of the spaces on their personal player board, and then everybody else will have a chance to convert all of their tokens to nuts to get squirrels to fill in any other spaces they have. If your scoring on the game is basically you get a negative points for any empty spaces, plus you get additional points for any leftover nuts at the end of the game. And then, obviously, probably whoever had the fullest board is going to be the winner. Let's just be fair. That's how these games are going to work. The other thing that's really interesting about Indian Summer is that most of the polyominoes you take have a hole in them somewhere, and you're hoping that you can lie them over top of icons that are pre-printed on your personal player board. The icons on your player board are going to match up to the 4 different kinds of tokens you can get, and once you have completed one of those 4x3 sections that you have 6 of on your player board, you're going to check to see if you placed holes over any of those particular tokens. If you did, you're going to earn that token, and then you get that token to spend for its various powers. The other super fun thing about the holes in the polyominoes is that if you line up sets of holes in 2, 3, or 4 spaces, depending on the shape and space you do, once those sections of your board have been cleared out of tokens, you can get these animal tokens that they go on top of those holes. And A, you get to have an animal token, then that's pretty cool. But B, if they were on top of any token that showed through your holes, you get that token again. So it allows you to kind of double get some of these tokens. And if you're super, super good at planning ahead, you can end up getting a bunch of the feathers or a bunch of the white mushrooms and getting all these extra turns. And there's a whole lot of synergy and stuff that you're going to get by getting those tokens, because you can trade them back and forth. And since this is definitely a race to fill your board, being able to use the feathers and the mushrooms to fill up your board faster is going to be a big benefit to you by the end of the game. So obviously at the end of the game, whoever has the fullest board and the most nuts left over is going to be the winner of Indian Summer.
There's a lot of really interesting choices that you're making in Indian Summer. Like you said, you do have that one large board, but you are really concentrating on these 6 smaller sections instead of having 6 smaller boards like you might have in Cottage Garden. When you complete a section, that is when you get the tokens, not when you cover over the specific tokens, even if you cover over them with holes. So it's really important to make sure that you finish each of those sections in sort of a timely manner so you have the resources that you need to more efficiently manage the rest of your placements. But at the same time, there is definitely a benefit to being able to place those larger pieces, since there are different sizes of pieces in this one. If you can place a couple of larger pieces, it may be worth it to place those onto the board, even if they can't all fit in the same corner. Whereas, normally you'd want to work through one section. But covering a lot of real estate in this game is also very important, like you said, because the first player to finish their board is going to trigger that end game scenario. I also really like the idea that once you have cleared off those whole spaces on the tiles, that is when you can fill them up with animals. So you want to be focusing on those small sections, not only so you get the tokens, but so you can place those animal tiles before other players can, because there is a limited number of each shape of tile. Some of the smaller ones, there's like 7 of them in a game, so you're going to have plenty. But some of the larger shapes, there's only 1 of. So you're going to want to get that quickly while still making sure that you're making the most reasonable decisions about how you're filling out your real estate, taking valuable tiles from other people with those mushroom tokens. It is just a lot of really interesting things to think about. And the fact that you are able to have your own group of tiles in front of you, I think allows you to plan a little bit better than the games in this series where you are drafting off of a central grid, which are actually going to be the other two we're talking about. We haven't gotten to Spring Meadow yet, but that also has a single grid that everybody's pulling from.
One thing, and if you go back and listen to our Gateway to the West episode from 2018, last year when we played this a little bit there, the thing that was most frustrating about this game to me was the token manipulation. You have these 4 different kinds of tokens, and you're allowed to trade them in as you wish, but you have to obviously do a lot of fiddly token trading back and forth. 2 berries equals 1 nut, 2 nuts equals 1 mushroom, 2 mushrooms equals 1 feather, and then you can trade them back down as well, but you only get like 1 if you trade the other direction as well, so it's kind of, you gotta like remember to do all this mental math and do all this back and forth stuff like that. This one I play on the app a lot, and I enjoy it for that, and we'll probably talk about this a lot later, because it takes care of all that manipulation for me and allows me to just think about the strategy rather than the physical moving around of stuff.
It also means that you can't forget about taking the tokens off of the board at the point when they need to be, because it's very easy if you're really getting into the polyomino planning in this game to not notice immediately that you've filled up one of your little 6x6 sections, or to think you've filled it up and to have mistakenly left one space and you shouldn't have those tokens yet. On the app, it automatically moves the tokens off the section to your supply for usage when you have earned them, and it shows you how many of each of the tokens the other players have in a really nice, clear way so that you can know what they may be planning to do. Particularly those mushroom tiles can be very, very detrimental to you if you're planning on using your first piece, so you've got to make sure that maybe you don't want to plan to use that first piece. Maybe you leave something that you don't really need as your first piece so that if somebody takes it, they're only getting that little green 3 as opposed to getting your really cool big red 5 piece that you wanted to use.
Yeah. I really like the level of player interaction in this as well. Like you said, the mushroom there, and you have a moderate amount of thinking about what pieces are going to end up in other players' stuff. Obviously, if you take somebody's last piece, they're going to refill immediately for free, rather than having to spend a berry on their turn to refill up and get whatever token they may want. So you have a little bit of player interaction there, but not so much that it's going to get in the way of your play.
You can also see what they're going to get to refill with, because you have that one large circle that shows all the pieces in the order. If you look and you see, oh, there's like 3 red pieces right after the pawn, I've got 2 pieces left. Maybe I want to use a berry on my turn to take those 3 pieces, even if I'm going to place something that I already had on my board. And then maybe the polyominoes after that are green and yellow pieces, so the next person to refill is going to get something less good. That's the time I want to use my berry on, even though it's not absolutely necessary. So there is planning in that way as well. And as opposed to where I was talking about Cottage Garden, not really feeling like that future track was really involved in what I was doing in the game. In Indian Summer, I was looking at it. I was going, oh, okay, there's a lot of strong pieces. I want to make sure I get those. Or I want to make sure that I'm leaving a hole that I can possibly get a piece to fill.
Yeah.
So I don't have to spend 3 turns filling that 3 space with squirrels. Just keep shoving those squirrels into that space.
One final initial thought on Indian Summer. I do like the fact that there's many different kinds of animals in this one, squirrels, and then obviously the animal tiles themselves, so it does win with having the most different kinds of animals versus the other 2 games.
Kind of. Spring Meadow has a bunch.
And Cottage Garden does have cats.
Yes.
All right, so speaking of, Danielle, would you like to tackle Spring Meadow for us?
Sure. Spring Meadow is going to have one central board like we talked about with Cottage Garden. In this case, it is a 5x5 board. And you are, again, going to have one hiking marker that is going to move around the outside of it to determine what pieces you can take from that central board on your turn. Each player has in front of them their own personal meadow, and it is going to be 10 squares wide by technically 14 rows high, but I doubt you're ever going to get anywhere close to the 14th row. And on it, it has some pre-printed burrow markers. You are going to be selecting tiles from the center board, like I said, in the row that the gardener pawn is on your turn, and you're going to be placing them onto your meadow. The point is, by the time you get to a scoring, to have, from the bottom left corner of your board, the most consecutive tiles without a break before you get an empty hole on your board. There is a lot of open space in this game. This one is really the most open feeling to me. And you are going to be placing these out, hopefully. Again, the tiles have holes in them, and hopefully you're trying to line up the holes on your polyomino tiles with the pre-printed burrows on your board, because that is going to give you what is called a cleared burrow. And you use a cleared burrow either to get a point in the scoring phase, which they are worth a point, but they also are what allow you to place a polyomino over one of those pre-printed burrow tiles without lining the hole up. If you'd like to ever do that, to cover over a pre-printed burrow with not the whole part of a polyomino, you have to place a marmot into one of your cleared burrows, meaning it is no longer clear because there's a marmot and he lives there.
Aw, he's a marmot.
He is a big old squirrel-looking dude.
From Wikipedia, marmots are large squirrels in the genus Marmota with 15 species.
They look like groundhogs to me.
Marmot fact.
But you are trying to get as many of these cleared burrows for points and for adaptability as you can while still filling from that bottom left, continuing up. Once the marker token that allows you to take tiles reaches a row that has, depending on your player count, usually 1 or 0 tiles in it. Sometimes in a lower player count, in a 2-player count game, it will have 2 tiles or less in it. You are going to start a scoring phase. The player whose turn is interrupted by this scoring phase will get a token worth 2 points, and everybody else is going to just count up the number of squares that they have from that bottom left, continuing in like a typewriter manner until they get to a hole. You add in any point for your cleared burrows, which don't have a marmot token on them.
Marmot fact. Marmots typically live in burrows, often within rock piles, particularly in the case of the yellow-bellied marmot, and hibernate through the winter.
Cool. Well, it's spring. It's the spring meadow. Whoever has the highest score from those consecutive squares and also their cleared burrows is going to take the token which was given to the player whose turn was interrupted and flip it over, and it has a hiking pin. The first player to 2 hiking pins, meaning that they won 2 different scoring rounds, will be the winner of the game. When you win a round, you are then going to take marmot tokens and fill in all of your cleared burrows, which is sort of, I guess, a balancing mechanic so that you don't get those extra points and that adaptability from having the ability to cover over the burrow marks on your board. And then you're just going to keep going again. You leave everything that's already on your board and you keep working from there. So if you were building towards a really strong thing and you just didn't get a piece to fill it in, you have an opportunity on the next scoring round. There is also a similar mechanic to Indian Summer that you described, that if you have holes on your polyomino tiles that form groups, either a group of 2, a group of 3, a group of 4, or a group of 5, you are going to take a rock tile of the value 1 less than the size of the group of holes. So if I have 2 holes next to each other, I'll get a single rock tile. If I then add a third hole adjacent to them, I will then get a 2-space rock tile. And you can use these to fill in holes on your board that are either just the way you place the tiles or continue up farther. They are going to be really useful and adaptable, and they must be placed immediately when you earn them. You go until somebody wins 2 scoring rounds, and they are the winner of Spring Meadow.
Marmot fact. Most marmots are highly social and use loud whistles to communicate with one another, especially when alarmed.
Why marmot facts?
Because I pulled up the thing to talk about how they're large squirrels. I just love the fact that Wikipedia says marmots are large squirrels. And now I have it open in front of me. There might be additional marmot facts as we go on.
How about Spring Meadow facts?
Spring Meadow facts. Here's one Spring Meadow fact. I expected in this game to have a runaway leader problem because whoever is going to score the hiking pin on the first round is more likely to have a higher set of, full-in meadow. But I was really surprised, especially playing higher count games, how evenly spread out it was. So for a Spring Meadow fact, I was very surprised how well balanced this game was. It's probably with the filling in of those marmot burrows, and just allows you to really kind of stay competitive throughout the entire game.
Yeah, I enjoyed the idea that when you win a round, you then have to fill in all of your cleared burrows, which initially seemed like, oh, you're only giving up a few points because you do get those extra points for having cleared burrows. But the bigger impact of that was that you now can no longer cover over the burrows which are drawn on your board, and you have less adaptability in your placement. Whereas everybody else still has available to them the cleared burrows from the earlier round, and if they want to put something over one of those drawn burrows, they have that ability, and it's going to allow them to fill things in much more quickly, or maybe to make the groups of holes that they wanted to be able to get a rock token to catch up to where you are. Another really great thing about this game is the way that they've allowed you to plan, because around the outside of the board there are dots, and depending on which player count you're playing with, you'll use one or the other side of the board. There's a side for solo or 3 players, and there's a side for 2 or 4 players. And as you move the hiking guidepost around the outside, there are dots, and you can plan. Like, I always pick from the rows with the single dots because I was the first player. Or in a 3-player game, maybe I always pick the second. And on that side of the board, the number is very differently. But you can always plan ahead to know which numbers are yours when you're placing the tiles. So you can look, okay, I'm going to take from this row, and then my next option will be from this row. And there's no option for somebody to take this one particular tile because of which rows it will go on between those two turns, or I can see that we're definitely going to have scoring before my next turn because I can see that there's no tiles left in this row right before mine. So I am not going to win this. How can I plan for the next round? What do I want to make sure that I see? Like, what kind of holes am I leaving in my board because I know that's going to be left? It allows for planning in a way that I don't think either of the other two are so clear in how it lets you plan.
Mm-hmm. I love the way the central board works in Spring Meadow. Just like you said, being able to look a few turns ahead and say, all right, I'm going to have a choice of this row and this row. If I take this one, it's going to force a scoring round 3 rows later. It's a really awesome opportunity to think ahead and strategize, and then also get in the way of other players. Like, if I specifically know I'm in a great position right now, if I take this tile, it's going to force scoring before somebody else's round. Maybe I'm going to take that tile, even if it's not the optimal tile for me out of that row, just because I know it's the one that will force scoring, which will turn out better in my favor. I just love having that kind of interactivity in that particular zone of the board, of being able to choose what tile is going to impact other players.
And it is a very similar board to the board from Cottage Garden. It is slightly smaller. The Cottage Garden board is slightly smaller. It's 4x4 as opposed to 5x5. But I didn't find myself considering it as strongly in Cottage Garden, probably because Cottage Garden has those smaller player boards, and you're so easily covering over your own points and giving yourself a really hard time by choosing something that's not your optimal move. Whereas in Spring Meadow, you've got a lot more open of a board, so you can take a suboptimal move and maybe account for it later with either a rock tile or just with getting a different shaped tile, because you have openness and you can place things in spaces that aren't, maybe you'll take something in the next turn and place it on another side of your board, and you won't leave yourself really hosed like you can in Cottage Garden with those smaller boards.
I really also enjoyed in Spring Meadow how the rocks you get are 1 less than the amount of holes you're able to get in a sequence. I don't know why, but having it be 1 less just felt right, and it felt good, because then you feel more rewarded for getting to that second or third or fourth hole in a line there. If you got a rock every single time, or if you only got a 2-piece rock once you had 2 holes, I feel like that balance wouldn't be as strong. And it feels more like oh, cool, I got a little extra thing, rather than I have to get these things to continually move ahead. Obviously, having those little 1 and 2 pieces are super great because you get to fill in the earlier holes in your board, but I never felt like I was forced to get them, you know what I mean? And I just really enjoyed that.
But they are really, really useful because there are times when you absolutely have to leave yourself a hole in your plan. And to be able to say, okay, I can leave this hole now because I have this other option for a rock up higher on my board. Like, I've got a little cutout in a corner where I know I can definitely put something next to it. There's an availability. Or to look at your board and say, I don't have any of the holes that would make rocks on an edge.
Yeah.
I need to make sure that I don't leave holes lower down in my board. In the last game of Spring Meadow that we were playing just the other night at game night, one of our players really ended up in some deep trouble because he left a hole on like the 5th line of his board.
Oh no.
But then never was able to get one of the, I mean, when I say he left a hole, he left a blank square.
Yeah.
But he was never able to get a hole up on the top layer of his meadow so that he could place another one next to it and get a rock to fill in that hole. So he ended up scoring like 5 or 50 points for his final scoring round, even though he had several rows on top of that because he had an empty space.
Yeah. You got to be really careful while you have those burrows because marmots might slide in at the wrong time.
I don't think that's the... No, that's not the lesson.
That's the moral. But one of the things I was most surprised about is the etymology of the term marmot is uncertain. It may have arisen from the Gallo-Romance prefix marm, meaning to mumble or murmur, kind of like an example of onomatopoeia. Just another marmot fact.
This is
for you
not
there.
helpful.
I think it's funny.
I mean, it is funny, but we're talking about so many games this episode. We gotta keep on track as to what we're talking about.
All right, so I think it's time for us to tie the 3 together then. Okay, so for the purpose of conversation and kind of tying them together, there's a few different things that I feel we can focus on. First being the way in which you acquire and place your tiles. The second being how placing the tiles rewards you in certain ways. And the third being in the way that the game ends and scores. Does that make sense?
The first one is the most obvious. There are two different types of ways that you place your tiles in this series. And when I talk about this series, I want to include Patchwork in it.
Yeah.
Because while it is not one of the 3 games in this puzzle series, it is by the same designer. It came out just before the first one in this series, and it very strongly ties into these games.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the game of the whole puzzle series. It has a lot of the games have a lot of DNA shared with Patchwork, so it makes sense to include.
Okay, so there are essentially 2 ways in which you get your tiles. You either get them off this central grid, which you can draft from, based on where a determining marker is. It's the gardener marker in Cottage Garden. It's the hiking trail marker in Spring Meadow. Or you get them from a predetermined order which you are moving around. In Indian Summer, this is the circle around the outside that you can draw your own personal tiles from. In Patchwork, it is literally the thing which allows you to take the 3 tiles in front of it. And it exists a little bit in Cottage Garden, even though I said earlier when I was talking about it that I didn't really pay much attention to it. There is a line that is going to fill in the board. It's just a matter of how that line is going to fill in the board.
Yeah. I think of the 2 different mechanics, I want to have one or the other, but I don't want both, which is one of the reasons I'm not super keen on Cottage Garden. I don't care about the line on that grid, and it doesn't influence me to look at it in any way. But in Patchwork, obviously the whole game is manipulating that line, and in Spring Meadow, everything is about looking ahead on that board and how that's going to interact with the other players.
Yeah, I agree with you. When you put them both together, it does become a little mixed, but I do think that they are both very strong ways to plan ahead. I like them both. I'm not going to say like, oh, I definitely like the line ahead where you're just picking from that group, or I definitely like the grid. I think they're both strong, but it does divide these games into 2 different groups.
And weirdly enough, even though Indian Summer is that line of filling your own personal stuff, I'm not as enticed by that. Like, I'm not constantly paying attention to the line of what other players are going to get into their personal set. Maybe it's just because it allows you to get it into your personal set, and then I don't have a whole ton of interaction with those particular pieces, other than obviously the mushroom allows you to steal the first piece. But I don't know why of the tile selection mechanics, that's the one that I'm least interested in, other than, I guess, Cottage Garden. So both of those 2, I'm not super excited about.
Disagree entirely, because when you're playing, especially near the end of a game of Indian Summer, you need to make sure that you're going to be able to even get the shape that you're planning to leave.
Okay.
Because as you get towards the end of the board, because you have to fill your whole board to bring on the end game in that game, and because placing a single squirrel takes up your whole turn. I mean, you can use a nut to place a squirrel in addition to placing a tile, but A, that gives up a point, and B, it decreases the amount of exchange that you can do. Maybe you had only one nut and now you can exchange up for a mushroom or something. But I found myself, as I was getting towards the end of a game, looking to see what was coming up in that line. Was there the shape that I wanted? How can I use berry tokens to make sure that I get the piece for the shape that I want into my bag as opposed to somebody else getting it into theirs? Or if I can't do that, do I have a mushroom to hopefully be able to take it from them? Is there a way that I can use my mushroom tokens to take pieces that I can see that my opponent really wants? Or maybe it's just a larger piece that is going to give them an advantage to maybe have them have to place a smaller piece or use a token. I did find myself looking at that. Not in my first game of Indian Summer, but certainly in my 3rd or 4th game of Indian Summer. I found that planning really useful.
Okay, I'll get with that. So of the 3, let's just say of the 3 of the trilogy, and leave Patchwork out of this part of it, which one do you enjoy the most of the way you get your tiles? Because my favorite is Spring Meadow. I love that 5x5 grid in the center of the board. I love being able to plan ahead for my next few turns. These are my top options. And I love the ability to kind of manipulate what other players can get on their turn just by thinking a few minutes ahead or a few moves ahead about what tile I take removes from their row as well. I just love that combination of mechanics.
I think probably I like Indian Summer best.
Okay.
Just because I like the fact that I have personal stuff that I can work with, and I have the ability to take from other people's, and I have the ability to manipulate what other people can get or what I can get based on those berry tokens.
Okay.
I like Spring Meadow too, don't get me wrong. I'm not like, oh, I don't like Spring Meadow at all. I like it quite a bit, but you made me pick one, so.
Oh, I did make you pick.
Boo.
All right, so moving on to the next section, we are talking about the way you're rewarded for filling out your board. So Cottage Garden, all of the scoring comes off of basically how you lay out your tiles.
Yeah, if you cover over all the things that give you points, the flower pots and the cloches, you may have completed a board, but all that does is let you put the tiles back in whatever order you want. And you don't get to move anything up if you've covered all your scoring. So how you cover your board is the game in Cottage Garden.
Gotcha. And then in Indian Summer, what you're rewarded with is the tokens that allow you to do extra things, either get more squirrels, refill your board, or take 2 tiles from other players, or play 2 tiles out of your own stuff. And obviously, it forces your play in a certain way that you need to complete each of those 6 sections of your board to get those tokens to then do more things. So you're rewarded for focusing on sections of your board one at a time.
Yeah, and it also is what allows you to place those animal tiles on top of the empty spaces once you remove the tokens from them in order to get even more tokens. But that is not how you win the game. You don't win the game by having sections done one at a time.
Yeah.
You win it by having your whole board filled.
Yeah.
It's just that having those tokens really helps you fill out your whole board because they're free actions.
And then Spring Meadow, you're rewarded with rocks, obviously, for lining up holes. You're rewarded with cleared burrows that allow you a little bit more flexibility in how you place your tiles. And then, obviously, Spring Meadow, I feel, is the one that forces you to fill in spaces the earliest, I guess, because you won't score high and around unless you have completed your bottom rows up to a certain point.
Yeah, it certainly directs the way in which you want to create your polyominoes. In Indian Summer, you can start anywhere you want. In Cottage Garden, you've got 2 different boards you can be working on at any particular rate you'd like, as long as you get them done. But in Spring Meadow, you want to make sure that you are working from that bottom left and you are moving up from the left and up to the right, so that you don't just place a whole bunch of things on one side and then get no points because you left that first square open.
Yeah. And in that way, I think Spring Meadow kind of calls back to Patchwork the most, because Patchwork, you're obviously racing for that 7x7, the secure section to get that extra 7 points, which is super, super useful. And, it can be anywhere on your board, but it wants you to really fill that thing in tightly to get those points early, in that it's a race, versus other players.
I agree. This is not in your initial list, but I do want to talk about the way that you get the tokens to be able to fill in individual spaces as well, because that is something that is involved in all of these games as well. It would have to be, because you need to be able to fill out your board. But in Indian Summer, you have the option to place a squirrel as a full move, so that can be your full move, which is the same as in Cottage Garden. You can place a flower pot or a cat.
Kitties.
I guess you can use a cat, which is going to allow you to take the rest of the turn, and in Indian Summer you can use a nut, which will allow you to place a squirrel and also do something else.
Right.
But you can always take an action in those 2 games to just fill in a single space.
Okay.
In Spring Meadow and also in Patchwork, you can't necessarily take an action to fill in a single space. In Patchwork, you need to be able to gain one of those leather patches, which come off the scoring board, which is based on your tiles that you're taking, how quickly you move ahead on that game scoring board. And as you do so, it also brings about the end of the game. But you need to be able to earn those. And in Spring Meadow, the only way to fill in individual empty spaces that you have are with rocks, and you need to earn those as well by putting 2 of the holes in your tetromino pieces next to one another. So I think that there are 2 different styles of game there as well. The ones where it is a little bit more forgiving of leaving holes, and the ones where you definitely need to earn something to fill those in. Okay. And of the 2 that are more, I would say, punishing, there's big old air quotes if you can't hear those being Patchwork and Spring Meadow, I think it is really good that Spring Meadow is a little bit looser. Like, there are many opportunities to get those single rock token things, which is very important, because otherwise you can go a game of Patchwork and never get one of those leather patches and still win the game. If you have left an empty space on your first row in Spring Meadow and you never were able to get a single rock, you would never win the game. So I think it is balanced nicely. Like, there are games in this series where it's easy to fill in holes, and those are the two games where you're focusing on a lot of other things. In Indian Summer, you're focusing on tokens, and you're focusing on sections, and you're focusing on filling out your whole board. In Cottage Garden, you're focusing on flower pots and cloches and earning tokens and how you're doing the scoring. And in those two more complicated games, you have an easy way to fill in holes. In the more simple games, you have a simpler way to handle it, and I think it balances well.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, that really all ties into that whole concept of how you're building out your board. I really enjoy the way that Indian Summer rewards you with tokens to give you that flexibility, but I also really, really like the way Spring Meadow allows you those rocks. I just love having that ability to say, I'm in charge of my own destiny about whether or not I'm going to fill up these holes. Like you said, in Patchwork, having to rely on those leather patches to fill in your holes is incredibly stressful, which is why I think that game works so well as a 2-player game. Like, I can't imagine ever playing Patchwork as a 4-player game. I just feel it would become unmanageable. You'd have to think too far ahead on every single turn, and I'm really glad that that hasn't happened.
You can't play Patchwork at 4.
That's what I'm saying. I'm glad that it's not a 4-player game, because I'm just imagine it would be too much of a pain in the butt to figure out how I'm going to fill, my quilt in as I'm going here. But I really like the way that Indian Summer and Spring Meadow deal with that flexibility of what you get as a return for your building out. I feel like they are well suited to the weight of those games. So the last kind of point we want to hit on, I guess, is the way in which the games end. They have different timers in them as well. They're all very different if you think about it. And this is the thing that I think is the most diverse about the entire Puzzle Trilogy. Obviously, in Patchwork, you're spending the resource of time. And when you run out of time, you can't put any more tiles on your board. Spring Meadow is going to be based on as that central board runs out of tiles and you end up in the row with 0 or 1 or sometimes 2 tiles. You're going to move on to a scoring round. Indian Summer is, I guess, the most straightforward. Person that fills up a board is going to be the person that completes or that triggers the end of the game.
Yeah, and Cottage Garden is based on number of times the gardener token rotates around the board as well.
Yeah.
But it is a set number of rounds at the beginning of the game. Either in a 2-player game, it is at most 5 rounds, or in a 3 or 4-player game, it is potentially 6 rounds, assuming anybody plays in that 6th round. So you know exactly how long the game is going to be in that one, which is not necessarily the case in any of the other ones.
And I honestly feel like they all suit their particular games well. I feel like Indian Summer, it's a race to fill in the board, which is complemented by the ability to play extra tiles by stealing other people's stuff or by getting the tokens that allow you to put squirrels in or take the feather to place additional tiles. Patchwork, obviously, you're balancing buttons and time with every single turn of the game, so it makes sense that one of those resources is going to stop you from playing any more of the game.
And in Spring Meadow, I like the fact that you do sort of get a reset point. After somebody earns one of those hiking pins, you do a little bit of balancing in the form of filling in any cleared burrows of the player who won, but then you refill the board and you get to start again fresh, and maybe I'm going to place the tiles in a way that allows me to win the next round, even if I was way far behind on this past round, just because I didn't have the shapes that I needed yet. Yeah. And everybody gets sort of a new fresh go at it every time you get a scoring round in Spring Meadow, even though you're leaving the tiles that you already had. Everybody's been taking tiles, so it's still, you have the basic building blocks that you needed, you just need to be able to do something with them each round.
Yeah, and in Cottage Garden, it goes around a set number of times, which is not very exciting, which is kind of how I feel about Cottage Garden.
Ouch, hot takes.
Well, we are getting to the end of this. I feel like I should start making some serious comments about it. I've never been super big on Cottage Garden. I played it a handful of times, and it was like, meh, okay, but the other series exists here.
It does some interesting things, but I think the way that you are working with the smaller boards instead of one larger board, and also the fact that your scoring is based entirely on how you fill out the board and not one of the other methods, just makes it the least interesting to me. I don't feel like I have as much control as I do in the other games. It is not a bad game, but it is not the one I would pick out of the 3 of these, and they're not close enough, but they have enough things in common that it's never the one I would go to.
Yeah, and honestly, I think a lot of what I feel with Cottage Garden is because I look at the other 2 in the series and I'm like, oh, I really like the way that mechanic or that is approached differently in that particular game. I really like the way the end of round and the tile selection in Spring Meadow works. I really love the way I'm rewarded for filling up my board in Indian Summer, and obviously Patchwork is a masterpiece. Again, we're focusing on just the 3, but if I have to pick all 4 of them, Patchwork is the one I'm most likely to play on any given day. Patchwork has been in our game night bag since it came out.
Okay, but that's not what we're talking about.
That's not what we're talking about here. But Indian Summer and Spring Meadow approach all of the different parts of the game in such interesting ways that it kind of makes me look at Cottage Garden as the one I'm like, okay, well, that game also exists.
Okay. Now, do you feel that you could own both Indian Summer and Spring Meadow, or that you would want to own both Indian Summer and Spring Meadow?
I feel like you can if you want to play those games and you enjoy them.
I thought you were going to say you can if you want to. I was like, yes, you probably can own a lot of things if you want to.
You have charge of your own destiny of which games you own in your collection. But what I will say is, while I like Indian Summer the best to play, I want to play Spring Meadow physically the most. And this is where we kind of have to bring in the other question about this, is that there are really good app editions of Cottage Garden and Indian Summer, and I can only assume Spring Meadow is on the horizon because Digidiced has done all of these. They also did Patchwork. They're one of the primo app studios in the world doing a whole bunch of great app versions of games. The Indian Summer app removes a lot of that fiddly token management, which I really don't like to play physically, but I really enjoy playing it digitally, and Indian Summer is one of my go-to apps on my phone. I'm constantly playing against the AI, which is pretty good, and you can choose to play easy game, you can choose to play a really hard game, and you're going to get a good feel out of all of those things. That being said, Spring Meadow is super easy to set up on a table, and I really love the way it looks, and you get to physically look at that big central board, and I feel like that's going to be better suited to the tabletop than it will to an app. I'm interested and also kind of hesitant to see how that one translates to an app, because I'm sure it's probably coming at some point.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Spring Meadow is a great game to pull out and play on the table. Mm-hmm. And we haven't even talked about this because it's such a, not even a pointless component, but it is such a throwaway component in my mind almost, but it is one of the best things that they could have done in this game. Spring Meadow has a compass token, and the entire purpose of that compass token is so that if you pick up a piece from that central board, you put the compass token in the spot, so if you're trying to see if it fits on your board, you can definitely check without taking the piece, but then you know exactly where you took it from, so you can put it back in the same spot. You just take the compass token off, you put the piece back down, and everything is fine. And that's super important because everybody else has been planning around which tiles were in which rows, and as that board empties out, there's going to be lots of empty spaces, and you want to make sure you put back the tile, if you don't take it, in exactly the place it was so that you don't screw up somebody else's planning. And just that simple thing makes this such a joy to play on the table. Like you said, it's super easy to set up. Throw out the board, fill it up with 25 tiles, give everybody a meadow, set up your little signpost, dump out the rocks, and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Indian Summer is a lot more pieces. It is a lot more things to keep track of, where it needs to be. Is this on my board? Is it in my using supply? Can I cover this over? Have I taken the tokens for when I covered this over with an animal token? Did I forget to take those tokens again? Did I already take them? How many mushrooms do I have? I love Indian Summer and I love all the stuff that it has, but I want it to be managed by my phone. And it does such a good job of being managed by my phone that I'm very happy with that.
Yeah. So I think we're pretty much in agreement here. Spring Meadow, fantastic game to play. Indian Summer, play it on your phone, and if you really want to play at tabletop, it's going to be great for you. Cottage Garden, also a game that exists, and everybody should own Patchwork.
There we go.
Cool.
Sounds good to me.
Well, of course, if you want information on those, you can go to our show notes section at draftmechanic.net, but it is time for us to move on to the beverage section of our show. It is time to put all of these 3 games on tap.
Yeah, they're just little untaps, but they're all there.
For more information on the beers we chose to pair with today's game on tap, check out the show notes section at our website, draftmechanic.net.
All right, let's go to the on tap. First up, Cottage Garden 2016 from Stronghold and Spielweise. 1 to 4 players, 15 minutes per player, pots, cats, and flowers. Our first beer selection is Central State Brewing Company over in Indianapolis, Indiana has Garden Goza, 3.6% ABV and 12 IBU. This is a Goza brewed with lemon peel and Cascade hops. 16-ounce cans available year-round. That sounds delicious, honestly.
I've had this. Have you not had it?
I don't think I've had this one.
Oh, I definitely had it at Gen Con last year.
Goza's great for coming into the summer season here, which I guess we're already in. This is June. Oh, holy moly, it is June already, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not technically summer, but in North Carolina, all of June is summer.
Oh, God, it's so hot. All right, Danielle?
Next, from the Vale Brewing Company in Richmond, Virginia, we have Cat Cat Nap Nap.
Oh, that's why you wanted to do the odd, even number ones.
No,
it's Nap Nap.
Because there's notes that I wanted to read. This is an American IPA that is 6% ABV. It is a double dry hopped IPA hopped with Galaxy, Citra, Nelson, and Mosaic hops. Ooh. This is an IPA strength version of their Dirt Nap double IPA. They've also done just Catnap, which doesn't have the double dry hopping, but it has been longer since they've done that. They just came out with Cat Cat Nap Nap back in March or April of this year. I want to say like the first week in April. They do a lot of their stuff on sort of an arbitrary rotating schedule. People are still drinking Cat Cat Nap Nap, so I'm guessing that there are some areas in Virginia that are still having cans of that. But if you can find it, give it a shot. And it is likely to come around again at some point. Just right now they're brewing their Dirt Nap Cubed, which is a triple something. It might be a triple IPA.
Yeah.
So they'll do another version of it. That is also, like I said, available in 16-ounce cans, and the cans are very, very cute with the sleeping kitty on them.
The Vale does A, very good beers, and B, very interesting can art. I've had a few of their things, and they have all been very, very good. So I've got to get up there at some point. We'll make that happen.
Yeah.
Next up, Indian Summer, the 2017 release, again from Stronghold and Spielweise, 1 to 4 players and 15 minutes per player. Leaves, squirrels, and tokens lead us to the brewery's Autumn Maple. This is a yam beer, and the brewery is over in Placentia, California, and Autumn Maple clocks in at 10% ABV with 15 IBU. This beer is brewed with cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, vanilla, molasses, maple syrup, and 17 pounds of yams per barrel, and then fermented over a Belgian yeast. This one also is a good pick if you want a relatively cheap brewery beer. Autumn Maple's really good. I haven't thought about this beer in a little while. 750 milliliter bottles, available seasonally, and not right now because this is spring, so they probably don't, or summer, so they probably don't have it available right now.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, both of the games that, or the beers that pair with the Leaf game, even though it's called Indian Summer, it's a fall theme, so these are fall beers. And when I talk about a relatively cheap brewery beer, we're talking less than $15 a bottle, which for brewery is almost unheard of. So if you are looking for an entry point for them, this might be the way to go.
I like Autumn Maple. I'm going to have to get a bottle of this year.
You're going to have to wait a bit.
I'll wait.
Next, the other pick is from New Glarus Brewing Company in New Glarus, Wisconsin, and it is their Fat Squirrel Ale. This is a brown ale that comes in at 5.8% ABV and 30 IBU. It is bottle-conditioned, unfiltered brown ale brewed with 6 types of Wisconsin malt and hops from Slovenia, Bavaria, and the Pacific Northwest. It comes in 12-ounce bottles, and it is seasonal. I am assuming they are doing it this year because they've done it every other year, but their seasonal schedule only goes out through June, which is rapidly becoming outdated. So hopefully when they put up their second half of 2019, you'll see Fat Squirrel right in their fall-winter time if you would like to get this brown ale. It is super tasty, like everything from New Glarus is.
How about you got to be in Wisconsin for it?
Or know somebody.
Lucky. Yeah, you might know a person. So third up, from Spring Meadow, about Spring Meadow, the 2018 release from Stronghold and Spielweise, the game that plays 1 to 4 players in 15 minutes per player. Stop me if you've heard this one before. It has meadows, marmots, and rocks involved in the game, and our first beer selected here is from Fin River Farm and Cidery in Chickacum, Washington. It is Honey Meadow Cider, 6.5% ABV cider brewed with honey and syrup made from local burdock and dandelion roots dried in their wood-fired oven. That is the most hipster freaking sentence I have ever read in my entire life. Oh, anyway, available in 500 milliliter bottles, and this one is brewed in early April.
Yeah, this absolutely looks delicious, and Fin River does some really neat ciders, so I would love to give this one a try. From Marmota Brewing in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, they contract brew, I'm not sure where currently, because finding out that they contract brewed at all was difficult enough.
Good job, brewery websites.
They don't really have a website. They have a Facebook page, and I don't speak Portuguese, so a lot of the information is a little bit hard to come by. But they have Marmota IPA, which is an American IPA, comes in at 6% ABV, 67 IBU. It's brewed with California hops that bring notes of passion fruit and orange peel, and this is available in a 500 milliliter bottle, which has the sunglasses and big old cheeks of a marmot on the front of it, and it is very cute.
I love it.
But we don't have a ton of Brazilian listeners, so I wanted to pick another marmot beer that would go with Spring Meadow in case you did not have the option of buying this Rio de Janeiro beer for yourself.
All right, so we have a beer from River City Brewing in Spokane, Washington, and it is called Midnight Marmot Imperial Stout. This Imperial Stout is 8.7% ABV and 78 IBU, and this is a big stout with espresso and chocolate notes. I can tell you that they are under new ownership and look real happy about this beer, but not much more than that because they don't have a website.
Yeah.
What are websites anyway?
I mean, I'm going to say that it is because they are under new ownership at the end of last year that maybe they don't have a website set up for this. Okay. But that's not really an excuse because we're in June.
Do they have a Facebook page or something?
Probably. They are doing like special garage meetups and they have a space, but this is This is an up-and-coming brewery, shall we say.
It's called Midnight Marmot, so I love it already.
Yeah, I think a Midnight Marmot is supposed to be some kind of superhero based on all their descriptions of this beer. But, yeah.
Let's just say they were hibernating or something. I don't know. That's the connection. Anyway, if you would like more information on any and all of these beers, you can go to the show notes section at our actual functioning website, draftmechanic.net. It is a website that exists and will give you information about beers, unlike some of the breweries we have talked about in this and other episodes.
Novel.
I bet River City Brewing right now probably feels a lot like homebrewers in regards that they're under new ownership and they're doing things out of their garage. And was that the best segue I've ever had into your beer segment in a while?
No.
No? Was it at least passable?
It certainly was.
All right, Danielle, what are you talking about in today's beer segment?
I am talking about the legalization of homebrew. You might think that homebrew has been a thing that's been around since the end of Prohibition. I mean, it has been around for a long time before that. Obviously, people have been making beer largely in their homes since people knew how to make beer. And actually, honestly, since before people knew how to make beer, since they sort of accidented into it. Mm-hmm. But when Prohibition took place in the U.S. In 1919, obviously it became illegal to brew any kind of beer. That includes homebrew. That especially includes homebrew because that's what most people ended up doing. But when homebrew became illegal in 1919 with the passage of Prohibition, you couldn't brew beer, which you would think would have ended in 1933 when the 21st Amendment repealed Prohibition. But the repeal of Prohibition included the legalization of home winemaking, along with commercial alcohol, obviously, but not of home beer making.
Boo.
So homebrewing beer remained federally illegal until the late 1970s. On October 14th, 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed H.R. 1337, which was a bill that largely had to do with excise taxes and commercial trucking, as well as public transportation. However, in a rare instance of a notable amendment being tacked onto a bill that does something that's not completely stupid, Senators Alan Cranston of California and Representative William Steger of Wisconsin, I might point out that these were a Democratic senator and a Republican representative, so go by partisanship, introduced Amendment 5354. And this would legalize homebrewing beer for personal non-commercial use. The H.R. 1337 provisions allowed up to 100 gallons per person or 200 gallons per household to be brewed. And at this point, according to the federal government, you could homebrew beer. The small problem is that this bill left regulation of homebrewing largely up to the states individually. This means that depending where you lived, you couldn't homebrew beer until possibly 2013, which is when the last two states legalized homebrewing beer, Alabama on May 9th and Mississippi on June 1st. In a related piece of presidential beer history, which is actually what made me think about this for this episode, in his 2016 interview with Anthony Bourdain, who passed away a year ago this week, President Obama mentioned that in 2011, he and former White House chef Sam Cass had purchased a homebrew kit and consulted with a local homebrewing store to develop House Honey Ale and House Honey Porter, both of which were brewed with the honey from the White House South Lawn beehives. Talk about local ingredients.
That's awesome.
Beehives right on your property. The recipes for both of these beers were released in 2012 after someone started a We the People petition for them to be shared, which, frankly, I think states about how ridiculous some of these We the People petitions can sometimes be. But we got the recipes for the White House beers. And as I'm sure Ina Garten would agree, if you can't get White House honey, store-bought is fine. I will put links to those recipes as well as obviously all the sources for this information up on the show notes. So if you would like to homebrew the White House's homebrew beers, you can do it too.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we have any listeners out there that have done that. If you have, maybe sharing a note in our guild thread would be a good place to do that, or jump on our Slack channel and let us know about your experiences brewing one of those beers. I know we have a number of homebrewers that are listeners. So, yeah, congratulations. You can homebrew in the United States as of a while ago.
Well, not so a while ago. 6 years ago in 2 states at least.
Very true. All right, well, we have, believe it or not, a final round because Jake remembered to do his job and post a final round topic. And we've got time for it, so after this bump, we're going to come back and talk about board game apps in a structured way, instead of just throwing it into almost every single game we talked about on this episode. How novel! Here it comes! Want a second opinion on some of the games we talked about on this episode? Check out some other great content creators at punchboardmedia.com. So in this grand return to form, Jake has posed a question of the Slack channel. If you want to join in for a final round in the future, you can jump on our Slack. If you go to draftmechanic.net and click Slack up at the top, it'll give you the link to join in and jump in there with us and talk about board games, craft beer, and anything we can do to tie those items together. So this particular question kind of came to light as we were talking last episode about Terraforming Mars, the app, and I said, what makes a game app great? Are there must-have features? What kinds of games work? What doesn't work at all? And can games be too long or too big for a successful app?
I think this also very much ties into what we were just talking about, how Indian Summer and Cottage Garden both have those very functional apps, and how Indian Summer, in fact, the app might supplant the game for both of us.
And I feel like we're going to probably throw out a lot of our thoughts in on this one as well, because it's something we talk about a lot, both on the show and in person as we're playing a bunch of board games.
Sure. First off, Dave Fancannell said, I don't think of game length as a negative when it comes to board game apps. While I've purchased my share, the only two I return to regularly are on the heavier side, Terra Mystica and Through the Ages, both for their multiplayer game exclusively. Having 2 or 3 of the games going with friends, sometimes only taking a single move in a day, is perfect for us.
That's something I didn't really think about, but it makes a lot of sense. If you want to play these big games asynchronously, and you know them well enough that you can jump in and out and just take one turn at a time, I think some of these apps are probably great for this, and it's probably a lot easier to fit that in with friends, both in terms of, physical space and also trying to find 3 or 4 hours to fit in some of these big, meaty games.
Certainly, especially, with people moving the way they do now and working remotely or just meeting up with folks at cons, it's really easy to have friends that you have all across the country, even if people make friends on the internet. Ugh, the internet.
All right, up next, Danny Doherty had this to say. I think the best app port I've played is Carcassonne for the iPad. It's a direct port of the art. The game benefits on the go from having unlimited table space, and the complete lack of hidden information makes it perfect for side-by-side pass and play at a bar. I also have stopped buying portable, easy-to-set-up games. Avignon is a nice app, but the cards are more portable and take up the same space. Hive and Friday were less good apps, but the games were already super portable and easy to set up. I've been debating buying one of the quote-unquote clever games, either Ganz Schön Clever or Doppelt so Clever for Android, but they're both portable, and I do not think my partner would appreciate me getting in plays and improving my strategy behind her back. And that's funny, because when we've talked about Ganz Schön Clever and Doppelt so Clever, those are both games that we want to play solo pretty much exclusively at this point.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes those games really good with an app for me, personally, more Doppelt than Ganz for one glaring error with the app, is that you don't make a ton of noise when you're playing them. I don't like playing dice games in public at places that are not board game meetups, because rolling a bunch of dice at like a restaurant or in a bar when it's just like a regular evening, not a game meetup, always feels like it's disruptive to me. It makes a bunch of noise, it draws a bunch of attention, and I don't like it. Also, dice can bounce off the table really easily and go under a table, and then you're crawling under somebody's booth, and it's not a great look.
This happened to me with Deep Space D6 when I was playing at the brewery in Champaign, and I rolled a die into the trash.
Nice.
The trash was mostly empty. It was okay.
Oh, great. But I really like that as long as you remember to turn off the woo on the Ganz Schön Clever app, it doesn't make any noise. And the Doppelt app has fixed that. I don't think it has that noise at all if you have your phone on silent. So I like that as just not necessarily as a portability issue, but just as a keep to myself, not bother everybody else issue. Chris Whitpen from Game All Night said, great solo play and easy to use interface. I love my Carcassonne app.
Yes, I had to.
I love my Carcassonne app, as well as Ticket to Ride and Twilight Struggle. So sad my Can't Stop app stopped working.
So this is...
It is an only stop app now.
Can and only can't start app. This is actually something that's worth mentioning. There is the possibility that some of these board game apps will just stop being supported as people upgrade their phones. Does that make you at all concerned about board game apps, knowing that at some point you might not be able to play Ganz Schön Clever if they just decide to stop updating it for iOS?
Not really, because if I really, really needed to play that game again, assuming it were still in print, which it currently still is in print, and if it were out of print, maybe I would have a different feel on this. I could just get a copy of it and then I'd play it like any other board game.
Fair.
Knowing that I had only spent a couple of bucks on the app. Unless we're talking about something like Terraforming Mars, where the app is Steam priced, where it's quite a bit of money. I don't see there being a huge problem. If I spent $2 on the app and then I have to go buy a secondhand copy of the game, you're still probably paying less than MSRP total.
Okay.
I also think that developing these apps are enough of an investment that I think as we see more and more complex apps, companies are sort of incentivized to keep up with updating them because they spent but they spent a good bit of money to get them built in the first place. Plus, it increases the spread of their game. People may be seeing it that might not have seen it otherwise. People are playing more plays of their game, so they're more likely to bring it out because they remember how it goes. While Can't Stop is definitely a shame that Chris can't play it, I don't think the Can't Stop app was probably up to snuff of something like the Indian Summer app. I don't think there was as much put into it by the company, so I think it probably fell by the wayside for that reason. Whereas I have confidence that hopefully these other apps will be kept up because they were a really useful tool and a fairly significant investment.
I hope so as well. Next up from Will Foy. Screen size awareness plays a role. Certain apps will do better on tablet than phone because of need for screen real estate to render the game. I would not want to play the upcoming Raiders of the North Sea app on my phone if it were offered, but on my tablet, booyah, more plays of my favorite game. Whereas the experience of, say, Nakmal or Ganshan Clever works equally well on either, meat stick thumbs notwithstanding, I think also that a tablet is more well suited for mobile gaming that is longer session versus quicker quote-unquote standing in a line, or other time filler plays. I wouldn't want to burn attention and battery on a longer scale game on phone, but tablet will be suited for longer run tasks. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Terraforming Mars. I wonder if Terraforming Mars is the kind of game that people want to play on their phone, both because it takes up a lot of screen real estate and it is a longer game. But I will say, as I've been playing the beta version here, I actually am really enjoying it more than I thought I would. I'm not playing it on Steam as much as I used to because I just don't really want to sit down in front of my TV or computer and play one of those games for that long. But Terraforming Mars, despite being still, a 30 to 45 minute game when I'm playing, has been really good when I'm traveling and I'm at a dinner or something and I'm just sitting there by myself. It gives me something to do. So again, I have a very large phone also, which helps on the screen real estate thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I definitely have more of a problem with this because I do have a smaller phone and don't have laser eyes like you do.
Laser eyes.
By laser eyes, I mean LASIK for anybody who thinks I am just a super weirdo.
No, I'm actually Cyclops from the X-Men.
No, you're not. Neither one of us owns tablets that are in any way functional for board gaming. We have rocks that play music, but that's about it. So I don't think we're really qualified to say how tablet gaming works with screen real estate like Will was talking about, but I have definitely gotten in fewer plays of the Race for the Galaxy app because I don't, even though I know what those cards say, there is such a condensed version of the screen real estate that it's difficult to deal with. And unless you're sitting somewhere that's not moving at all and you can divide your full attention to it, and it is, you are willing to spend the time to zoom in and zoom out and double check this and close that menu so that you can see this other thing. I do feel like some things are just too dense for phone gaming.
Yeah. They have to do some really interesting things with UI to make some of these bigger complex games fit and make sense.
Especially stuff with lots of card text. That's the thing that usually becomes a problem for me. Javier says, I really want a different experience from the board game. Let's be honest, I'm buying the cardboard thing if I like it, so I need a great app to offer a different experience. Usually just making the gameplay faster is different enough, but it's good to be surprised by the developers, like Galaxy Trucker once surprised me. And that is worth investigating, because a lot of us are playing games on our phone instead of buying them, but if you're buying the physical copy and then getting the app afterwards, it is going to have to give you something that you can't get from the game, whether that is portability or whether it's speed or whether it's just a cool implementation of something that was previously only in your theater of the mind.
Yeah. I think the other thing that is added content that I've really enjoyed is having campaign or scenario play. We talked about a long time ago Castles of Mad King Ludwig app, which has a fantastic scenario-based story progression where you have to play through a whole bunch of different rule sets and different manipulations, and you're unlocking additional levels by beating those special conditions on those levels. Splendor has the same thing with the World Tour. Jaipur has the same thing with, again, different rule sets and stuff you have to deal with working your way through the game. I feel like that is the space that board game apps have the most opportunity, is finding a way to serialize your gameplay experience to make you continue to come back to that in a way that you don't generally do in the physical board game version.
You just talked about campaign apps and said the word space, and you haven't said the word Star Realms yet. And I'm amazed by that, because Star Realms had a campaign on the app before it had a campaign on the table.
That's very true. And the Star Realms, like I've talked about many, many times before, the campaign in there is fantastic. It is so long and so deep and has so much interesting gameplay manipulation. I'm a little sad that I didn't think of that as well. Thank you for keeping me honest, Danielle. All right, finally rounding us out, as it happens in every final round, we have Patrick Hillier, and he says the following words. I started doing Android app reviews years ago. I buy most just to try them. I'd say they fall into a few different categories for me. Category 1, complex games simplified by online play that I like to play solo. Suburbia, Sentinels of the Multiverse, Burgle Bros, and the Ganshan Clever series of games. 2, games I still don't like even as an app, Galaxy Trucker and Terra Mystica. 3, pass and play while waiting with my spouse, Lanterns, Cat Lady, Paperback, usually shorter games. 4, games I play asynchronously with my friends, Ascension, Shards of Infinity, Waterdeep, Star Realms, and Morals. And 5, heavier games, apps to kill time, but I still would rather play in person, Through the Ages, Castles of Burgundy, and Terraforming Mars. I generally play on a larger phone. I haven't found screen real estate to be too much of an issue, as long as they have the click to enlarge option. Asynchronous games need to have a good notification system, and the AI needs to be good as well. The play of Terraforming Mars is fun, but the AI is not challenging. Side note from Jake here, I find the AI to be decently challenging, but I'm also not as good as Patrick at Terraforming Mars.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick has played several games of Terraforming Mars.
just a few. He continues, like I said, I've tried dozens of apps, but few stick with me long term. Those listed above are those who are still on my phone. Let's all take a moment to contemplate Patrick's wise words. Yes.
One of the things he mentioned above that nobody else had said is having a good notification system for asynchronous games. I remember, I think it was when Patrick came out on app, their notification system wasn't working 100% of the time, and there was a timer about how long you had to take your turn before it timed out. I believe that was Patrick, right?
It either at launch or like some point after a few weeks after launch it broke or something like that, but yeah, it was patchwork.
So people were missing their turns in games online with other players because they didn't know it was their turn yet, which is going to be a bummer, especially in a game that is so good to play one-on-one with other people multiple times. I know you had a couple of games where you were going back and forth with the same players over and over again. So you want to make sure you get your turns in. That is the only example of that I can particularly think of, but it is definitely something to keep in mind when you're developing an app, to make sure your notification system works the way it's supposed to.
I really want to start playing Patchwork on my phone again. I might have to put that out there into the world. And if I do, I'll probably end up posting it on our social media somewhere with my handles, so you can challenge me in Star Realms and or Patchwork. But as for app gaming, it's definitely here to stay, which is the dumbest sentence I've ever said on podcast. Oh, all right, we need to end this one. Danielle, thank you for joining me for this episode of Draft Mechanic, and all you listeners, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of this almost 2 hours episode that we thought we would get done in less time than this. But if you're looking for information on us, you can go to draftmechanic.net for all your Draft Mechanic needs, and add Draft Mechanic on your favorite social medias, as long as those medias are Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We also have the Board Game Geek Guild, that is guild number 2470, so you can send us a note there if you have anything to say. If you happen to be local to the Charlotte, North Carolina area, our next meetup is going to be on June 18th at Salud Cerveceria in the Nodon neighborhood, so we would love for you to come out.
And if you're coming to Origins, I will see you Friday night at the Unpub Room, 9:30. We'll have the Punchboard Media meetup. There'll be games, there'll be giveaways, all sorts of crazy fun stuff, and you can come buy a Draft Mechanic pin from me for $5. $5. Draft Mechanic is sponsored by Gray Fox Games. Visit grayfoxgames.com and sign up for their newsletter for the latest Gray Fox games. Quality games, cleverly crafted. Cleverly crafted. Gray Fox Games.
Yes.
Gray Fox. I forget what we do now.
Well, I say, as always, I would like to remind our listeners to please game responsibly, because it is important. And I tell them that I will see them back here in 2 weeks for another round.
Sounds like a good deal. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Draft Mechanic episode 102 is recorded on Sunday, June 9th, 2019 in front of a live studio cat who napped pretty much the entire time. Good job, bonus.
Beauty is in your eyes, you are the beholder. You render me stricken. Do not go gently into that gutter line.
Hey out there in podcast land, this is Brian, and I just wanted to invite you to check out my tabletop game review and preview video channel, Cloak and Meeple. There, I check out a lot of Kickstarter games, as well as sneak in some fresh reviews of published games. Come and check out all of the bad acting in my attempts to be entertaining in my intros. Stay for a game overview and hear my thoughts of the game at the very end. You can find Cloak and Meeple on YouTube at youtube.com/cloakandmeeple.
Punchboard Media,
where we all
bring something
to the table.
Pull up a chair
at punchboardmedia.com.